So I'm here with Nate Dunlevy, the author of Blue Bloods, which relates to the Indianapolis Colts, and expert Colts historian. Here to provide me with some real insight into what it was like when the Irsay, before the Irsays arrived, when the Irsays arrived, and the legacy changing from Robert Irsay to Jim Irsay, now to Carly and the others. So first of all, Nate, well, thanks for your time as always. But the first question is, what do you remember before, the famous, it was April night, wasn't it? Before the Mayflower trucks rolled into town.
March. Yeah.
March, yeah.
I
So
think
what do you remember? Sorry, what do you remember about Indianapolis before then? Was it a bit like the calm before the storm sort of feeling?
Yeah. So generally speaking, if you were to talk about Indianapolis before the Colts, people usually would call it Naptown, Indianapolis, very quiet, sleepy town. The city fathers had kind of developed a plan to build a reputation for Indianapolis around amateur sports, trying to attract a lot of like national, like kind of pre-Olympic qualifier type competitions. Obviously, the 500-mile race was a big draw, but the heart of the city really was basketball. Everybody was very basketball centric, basketball focused. I think the movie Hoosiers came out not too long after the Colts did, which was about high school basketball and really connected deep to the roots of the city of Indianapolis. Football was always an afterthought. What football watching there was centered around the Chicago Bears, which were very popular and kind of reaching their monster of the midway apex. But football was always second fiddle in Indianapolis. It just wasn't something that anybody took seriously. And the city as a whole wasn't a city that I think people took very seriously.
Yeah, so we can expand on that a little bit then, because I'm trying to get to the bottom of the man, the myth, and the enigma that was Jim Irsay. And from what I've seen of watching old YouTube interviews of a very young Jim Irsay, it seemed like he was the sort of head, although he technically might not have been in charge, he was heading this move up and seemed to be putting out the fires that Robert Irsay, his father, left in his wake. Would you say that's a true representation? Because obviously we only get, over here, especially in the United Kingdom, we only get the media side of things, the interviews, the pre-recorded, the scripted stuff. Did you sense the family tension there?
Well, I would say that prior to coming to Indianapolis, I mean, Jim Irsay was in college for most of it. He was very young when the team moved.
Yes.
The Bob Irsay made it really clear he had to have a new stadium. The franchise as a whole was falling into complete disrepair. They had a number of not just like bad seasons, but unwatchably bad seasons.
Yeah.
There were when they won the rights to draft John Elway for having the first overall pick. Elway said, I won't play there. I'm not going to go to Indianapolis to Baltimore. That's how bad the franchise was at that time. So you can understand why the administration in Baltimore and Maryland was not anxious to build a new stadium. They started to threaten to claim the team by eminent domain, which would basically put the team out of the Irsay ownership and into the hands of the local government. This was, not something that I think anybody in the NFL really wanted to happen. Obviously, it's a terrible precedent for NFL owners if cities could just claim their franchises. So as Bob Irsay was kind of making these rounds around different cities to try to see who's going to lure us in, right? Like who has a stadium ready. Indianapolis had the Hoosier Dome, which was completely unoccupied. The Hoosier Dome, by the way, its biggest claim to fame really before the Peyton Manning years was that it had hosted the largest basketball game, the highest attended basketball game in world history. So even the Hoosier Dome was more famous for hosting basketball games. NCAA championships would later come, but all of that was really possible because the Colts ultimately ended up coming. So I don't know about the family tension in terms of like who was driving the move. It certainly seemed like Bob was, but Jim definitely played a role in trying to present a calmer, a more reasonable face of the franchise than his father traditionally had. And you really saw that even more after they moved to Indianapolis, in which Jim was very often in front of the cameras in a much more visible way after his father named him to the GM of the team. Jim really was the front and forward face, and Bob sort of receded into the background as the years went by.
Yeah, and so just sort of like scooting along a little bit. So how do we get from a team in a abandoned high school elementary building, I believe was the front office and practice field?
Yeah, just about, yeah.
And again, correct me at any point, but the Hughes Dome, was it called the RCA Dome when they moved in, or?
No, it was the Hoosier Dome for the first several years. They sold the rights to RCA, which makes television electronics company. They sold the rights to RCA later, but it was called the Hoosier Dome. Hoosier is the generic term for someone from Indiana. I got give you a whole essay about what Hoosier means and what that is, but the long and short of it is it's someone from Indiana. So the Hoosier Dome was just a dome for people from Indiana.
Yeah.
So the transformation of the Colts from joke franchise to at least serious franchise to, marquee franchise would take place throughout the breadth of the final years of Bob Irsay, and really was the project of Jim Irsay. Once he took over the team, he had several decent drafts, but really it was his trade for Eric Dickerson in 1987 that was a big whoa. The Colts are trying to win. They made the playoffs as the result of that trade. They ended up getting a Monday Night Football game, which was a huge deal. Monday Night Football, in a very different way than it is now, was the marquee national exposure event. And the city of Indianapolis went crazy for the fact that, wow, national. Indy is a very chip on its shoulder, nobody takes us seriously kind of attitude. So the idea that national football was coming to Monday night and they were going to show up and the Colts were going to be a centerpiece, that was a big deal emotionally for the city. But there were still more down years, and it really ultimately was the drafting of Peyton Manning. And really, even before that, bringing Bill Polian in, which represented Jim Irsay's kind of step back from, hey, I'm going to run the show, I'm going to be the GM, I'm going to make the trades, to I'm going to be a more classic owner and let a Hall of Fame general manager run my team. Polian comes in, he drafts Peyton Manning. Before you know it, the Colts are on national television all the time. The Colts are one of the most watched teams in the NFL. And as a result, the whole city benefits from that.
Yeah, and I think that's so we can explore this, right? It's so from what I've seen and what I see from someone looking outside of Indiana, the father, I mean, depending on what side of the fence you're at, the father rips a franchise out of its hometown and takes it across state. Excuse the layman's terms of it, Nate, but over here, that would be absolutely foreign to an English person. The closest thing we have to that is a soccer team called MK Dons. Yeah. But I won't go down that route. That's something else. But so to someone like me who that's alien, the Colts are a funny story anyway, because Bob Irsay traded for him. He owned the rights to the Rams and then traded for the Colts or something like that. Let's just try and break that down a little bit for maybe someone who doesn't know American football as much.
So that whole history, the history of the ownership of the Colts, that seems foreign even to us, right? So the idea that you would move a team from one city to another, um, it was not unprecedented in American sports, but sort of the original sin. It's not really the first time it happened, but the first time it happened in a way that anybody really deeply cared about was the Brooklyn Dodgers leaving Brooklyn and moving to Los Angeles. And the San Francisco Giants went with them. When those two teams left New York City to go out west in the 1950s, they were championship ball clubs. They were, Jackie Robinson and Willie Mays. They had Hall of Famers all over. They were national brands. So when they left, suddenly any team could leave at any time,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
But it still wasn't very common. It didn't happen very often. Every 10 years or so, a franchise would struggle in one sport or another. NBA teams would move, excuse me, pretty often. But the Baltimore Colts leaving Baltimore was a real scar. Like they were an iconic franchise. Johnny Unitas had made them famous. Again, they were a national brand type of team. And it was that branding that became actually at the heart of a lot of the controversy around the Colts moving. When they left Baltimore, Baltimore sued the Colts, sued the Irsay family for the rights to the name and to the records. They wanted to keep the Colts and all of their history in Baltimore with them. The Irsay family said, no, that's part of what we own. That's our trademark. We own the history. We own the name. That was ultimately settled in court, and the Irsay family won. And Baltimore went through a variety of different methods, including at one point they had a Canadian Football League. Yes, a Canadian Football League team expanded to Baltimore, and they informally called them the Colts, and people would say, and now the Baltimore, and then they weren't allowed to say Colts, but the fans would yell Colts. There's all these things that would happen to try to be like, no, the Colts are still here, they're still ours. So the animosity ran really deep, and so the whole thing drug out much longer. It wasn't just like, hey, the Colts left in 1984, and in 1985 the city of Baltimore started looking for a new team. They wouldn't get the Ravens for another 10 years. And in the meantime, they fought tooth and nail to try to retain that identity, and ultimately were unsuccessful. So yeah, things like, hey, the Irsays Bob Irsay bought the team in the early 70s, and he actually bought the Rams and swapped rights. All of that is pretty wild for modern sports. It just shows you how far the NFL has come, that you could even do something quite like that. I think the closest thing in recent memory would be like the Montreal Expos were owned by a guy named Jeffrey Loria, who swapped rights to get the Florida Marlin. Like every once in a while you'll see it, but that's very unusual even for today's American sports environment.
Yeah, it sure is. So from muddy beginnings then, it seemed like Jim Irsay was determined to put that front-facing picture right.
Yeah.
I believe he's quoted as himself saying he really respects what the owners of the Pittsburgh Steelers were doing at the time, and how Pittsburgh was so connected to its city, its community, and that's the route he wanted to go down. When was it? Because we know the modern day legacy of Jim Irsay, but when was it the Colts connected with Indiana and Indianapolis as a community?
So it started with their connection to Indianapolis, which really took place in the middle 90s. The Jim Harbaugh Colts really won the city over. That was the first time in which it was pretty safe to say that most people in town were Colts fans. They made a miracle run, almost made the Super Bowl. Hail Mary rolled out of the receiver's arms at the last second. Those kinds of things really endeared the team. And the 96 Colts were very good, devastated by injuries, but actually a very lovable team that ended up losing again to Pittsburgh in the playoffs. At that point, the city of Indianapolis was very was very much a Colts town, and you'd see Colts
Yeah.
jerseys around. I went to college just 2 hours north of Indianapolis. It's still in Indiana, no Colts fans. Like, I was like the only Colts fan in town. Nobody was. Everybody's like, "Why would you root for the Colts?" It was all Bears country. That's also very close to the University of Notre Dame, which is a
Yeah.
big national college brand. So everybody up there is Notre Dame fans, Chicago Bears fans, no Colts fans. It was just unheard of. Uh, and it was really Peyton Manning who won over the state of Indiana, and then also really expanded the influence of the Colts down into Kentucky and through Tennessee, where he went to college. You would find a lot of Colts fans, and just pretty much in a corridor from the boundaries of Indiana all the way down to Tennessee. That was transformative, but it really took someone of Manning's stature to affect that kind of cultural change.
Yeah, and Jim Irsay himself, then, it's fair to say he's always been open about the struggles and addiction problems he's
Yeah.
struggled with. I don't like saying demons because that makes it sound really bad, but just struggles people have. And, I guess running a NFL franchise at 37, I believe he was, the youngest owner at the time, is quite stressful, it turns out. But he sort of steps back to try and work on himself a bit. As maybe someone who knows a lot about American football and the struggles that he went through with his father, was this a worrying time for the Indianapolis Colts? Was this a bit like, oh, we could go again at any minute here? Was the city a bit on tenterhooks?
In terms of losing the team, you mean? Or in terms of Irsay's general mental state?
As in, Jim's health, but this could explode again like it did with Bob Irsay in Baltimore.
So the biggest difference, I would say, between, and we'll talk about the city part first, then I'll get into Mr. Irsay's well-documented struggles. There was only a brief moment where there was any sense that the Colts might be at risk. Jim made it really clear that he wanted the Colts to be embedded in the community, and everything the Colts did as a franchise, as an organization, was to embed itself in the city of Indianapolis. The Hoosier Dome, which later was known as the RCA Dome, was pretty small at maximum capacity. I believe was just over 60,000 or 61,000 seats, which is on the very small end for an NFL stadium. So at one point they said, "Hey, we need more luxury boxes because of the way the NFL shares revenue." The primary driver for local revenue for a team is actually what they call these luxury boxes, the suites that big wigs and corporations can buy out. That's the only money you really get to keep as a franchise. Everything else you're splitting, which is great. It allows the NFL to exist in cities like Green Bay and Buffalo and Indianapolis and New Orleans, right? Those are smaller markets in Jacksonville. They can keep teams because everybody's sharing all the money, except these great luxury boxes. So they actually took out like 6,000 seats out of the RCA Dome to make more of these luxury boxes. But at that point, you've taken the dome down from 60,000 to like 54,000 seats, which is really small. And the city of Indianapolis, their broader strategy for making money was to have a big convention center, and it's right next to where the dome was. It was connected to the RCA Dome, and concurrent with the stadium getting smaller, they started to lose out on some major conventions because big 10, 20,000 person conventions would say, "Hey, your facilities are too small." And the only way to expand those facilities was right over the footprint of the dome. So while there were little bits of buzz like, "Ooh, the Colts could move to LA because Peyton Manning, sexy name, wouldn't it be cool if the biggest star wasn't in Indianapolis but was in Los Angeles?" That's the way people outside of Indianapolis would talk about us. The city knew, unlike Baltimore 20 years before, right? the city realized, oh no, we have to have a new stadium. We actually can't do any of the things we want to do as a city with the stadium we have now. So the stadium has to go. And if it has to go, we have to build a new one. So that tremor was very brief.
Yeah.
As for Jim Irsay's struggles with addiction, man, he has always been one of the easiest people to love and root for. So everything that I'm going to say, I hope it comes off with a lot of grace and a lot of understanding. Jim Irsay was always very open about his struggles. He was somebody who was transparent about the issues that his father had had with alcoholism. He, in his large collection that he amassed of popular culture items, he actually bought the original copy of the 12 Steps from Alcoholics Anonymous, right? And this was always something that was very personal to him because the process of recovery was something that he pursued his whole life and that everybody knew. Like many Americans, he fell under the opioid epidemic that happened. Opioids were very readily prescribed in the late 90s with impunity. He had a lot of injuries. He was a weightlifter, a very accomplished weightlifter, but hurt himself. He had a lot of injuries and surgeries. And during that time, he got addicted to opioids. And it was something that he would battle off and on. During the Polian years, he was certainly involved with the team, was very present. But Bill Polian was really driving the day-to-day operations of the Colts. It was not until he decided that he wanted to step back into the limelight, take back control of the team after the 2011 season, that it became clear that he was not at all times doing his best, or at his best, I should say. I think he was always trying his best, but he would give interviews that were bizarre. It was really clear when you'd watch him on TV that he wasn't always right, and he would give these long, rambling interviews, and he would say inconsistent and incoherent things. He gave a famous interview about, I don't want any more Star Wars numbers. He wanted to be in control of the team. At the same time, he clearly was struggling. He was famously pulled over by the police in a neighborhood called Carmel, which is just outside the boundaries of Indianapolis. He claimed the Carmel police were biased against billionaires, which is a local joke because the Carmel police are famous for being biased against somebody, but it's not billionaires. And he had a variety of very controversial and ineffectual decisions, like hiring Jeff Saturday out of the broadcast booth to coach the team. Just things that made it clear to everybody that he wasn't okay and he wasn't doing his best. He had it was always understood that if he was in a good relationship with somebody who was very stable, it could be very good for him. Some relationships come and go, and it was not always the best. And I think the team suffered a lack of direction. Again, he was so beloved and he worked so hard. It was so charitable. He was so giving that no one really liked to talk about it publicly. And he was also honest about his struggles. So it's not even just like a secret thing. And so nobody was ever mad at Jim Irsay for the hand that he had been dealt in life, which included $1 billion and an NFL team, but also included a family history of drug and alcohol abuse. And he was good-hearted and people wanted the best for him, but it was clear that it was taking a toll on his management of the team.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there, and I think you come across really well. And it's not easy, like you say, when such a beloved character has these flaws, because we want to see him as perfect human beings. And for people listening, you say jokingly, "Oh, he was born into $1 billion." Like, could it be that hard? And I think for me, what it seemed with Jim, it was always a constant fight between trying to be Jim Irsay, the lovable millionaire who give everything back, to fighting the demons that was passed down from his grandfather and his father. And as we know, the Irsays, and I don't know how much you could comment on this or how much you know, but when the Irsays, tragically lost Jim's younger sister, I believe, at a very young age, and his brother was severely handicapped. So the responsibility in sort of, to me, Jim became the lightning conductor for Bob Irsay's outburst and problems. And, even Jim Irsay has openly said about Bob that he was quite a volatile person.
Yeah.
But he didn't feel comfortable saying it because it's like, well, I can't talk bad about him because he's my daddy. And I think you're right that just how did it feel as a native, I suppose, watching this? You've seen this franchise blossom into Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck, Tony Dungy, Super Bowls, multiple appearances, to, seeing it didn't all collapse, right? Because now the Colts are back. The Colts are back. So are the Patriots, annoyingly, but the Colts are back.
Right.
But how did it feel like going from the dizzying heights to, he could almost be a caricature, if I could say it, at times. Yeah. And he was a bit of low-hanging fruit for the people like Robert Kraft or someone who likes to sit up in their ivory tower and not get involved with communities.
Yeah, it was depressing, to be honest. Yeah. And throughout even the worst of Mr. Irsay's struggles as an owner and the sort of drift that the franchise went under, he was still constantly doing charitable work and trying to connect to the community. And he was very active and connected to the fans. It was something that no one wanted to talk about. Like you wouldn't hear people calling up sports radio shows in the afternoon in Indianapolis and railing about Jim Irsay, right? Like nobody really wanted to do that. He was much too loved, much too popular for that, but we all knew it at the same time. And so it was depressing. If you've ever lived with a family member who struggles with addiction, after a while, it's just like, hey, man, I love you. I care about you, but man, we blew up Thanksgiving dinner again. It was that kind of relationship between the fans in the town. And because everybody knew his father was much worse, when Irsay did his famous interview with Andrea Kramer for the NFL, what was the show called? Inside the NFL, I believe. Just a couple of years ago, that was hard to watch.
Yeah.
Like he was trying to do it as like maybe a friendly interview and kind of show off like, hey, this is who I am. This is the good that I've done. But he just rambled and said very insensitive things. And it was sad. It was kind of one of those, like, whatever anybody thinks is happening, you can see it right there on the screen. He's not well. But the gift that he gave the city was that he had said, local writer Bob Kravitz said that he had said to him that, he didn't expect to live. He didn't expect to live very long. And because he knew his days were numbered for whatever reason, however he knew that in his heart, he made really good succession plans, which is great. He was prepared. I think he was prepared and he was ready to have peace, to have ultimate peace. And I think when he passed away, everyone was sad. Nobody was like, oh, like it was, he was a man who loved the city, did good for the city, and raised his kids as best he could. I think he was probably a better father than he had, which is all any of us can ever hope to be, just to do a little bit better, right? And I think you can see in the revitalization of the team this year, obviously they signed a great new quarterback, and you could look at guys on the field, but I think it really has to do with just a weight is lifted. It's a new day. His daughter's there on the sideline showing, hey, I'm here, I'm present, I'm looking
Yeah.
at it. If you've ever worked closely with or worked for somebody with addiction issues, I think it's not accidental that the boss is there and present and focused. I think that makes everybody perform just a little bit better. It's better to be part of an organization where the boss is on it as opposed to where the boss is erratic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have a lot to thank for him for that.
Yeah.
Like he understood who he was and he understood where his limitations were. And his daughters didn't just walk in one day and now there's somebody new. They had been there. They were embedded. They were part of the team. They learned the business, and that's another gift I think that he gave the city on his way out.
Yeah, and it feels strange talking about it now because he was such a cornerstone of the league,
Yeah,
and you know,
highly respected,
yeah,
influential. You know, when there were issues with the Dan Snyder regime in Washington, it was Jim Irsay who was not afraid to speak out. Part of the reason why he admired the Rooney family so much is because the Colts were his franchise. They were his fortune, his inheritance.
yeah,
The Irsay family's wealth is the team. It's not like they own a bazillion businesses and had all of this money outside. The Colts are the center of who they were as a family. You see now with the way his daughters are handling the transition that they're serious about it. You know, when you look at like the Tennessee Titans, the Bud Adams family, his daughter inherited the team along with a group of others. She lives in Houston, right?
yeah,
She's removed. Carly Ursay lives down the road. You know,
yeah,
her Carly Ursay's daughter goes to school in Indianapolis. You know, like these are
yeah.
people that are Indianapolis people that live here, that are part of the community. And that's something that came from Jim and came from the desire to be different than the way his father was. And it mimics the way the Rooneys are.
Yeah. So before we get on to the last part of this interview, then Nate, and we talk about the lasting legacy of the Irsay and the Irsay family. I mean, for me, like we say, Jim was he was quite easily the lightning conductor of the league, right? It was you either love him or you hate him. But from what I get, and the main reason of doing this documentary and producing this is every story you hear about Jim or anyone speaking about Jim, usually when you get an eccentric millionaire who's a bit rock and roll and a bit out there and probably belonged in a different generation, usually get, oh yeah, they gave money or whatever, but they weren't really a nice guy, or they didn't, you couldn't talk to them, or they were never there. Or an example that comes to mind would be a Vince McMahon who owned the WWE.
Sure.
a lot of stuff there to unpack. I'm not as into wrestling as I was when I was younger, but Jim Irsay, it's the opposite. Everyone you speak to, yeah, Jim was a bit crazy, but Bruce Arians famous for saying he got his wife. He was in hospital, and Jim Irsay got his wife there in 2 hours and left the Colts plane on the ground, so Bruce Arians could fly back. He's done a lot for Reggie Wayne, and he did for Tony Dungy. He flew his dad everywhere, telling him to come on my plate, and sending fans to the Super Bowl that aren't even Colts fans, giving away money to the local community, the charities. It just seems he wanted to be loved, and I wonder if that came from not getting love from his father and approval from his father. He sort of wanted that from the city because he was the shoe, right?
Yeah. I think it's telling that player after player from those great Colts teams that made the Hall of Fame, player after player, invited Mr. Irsay to give their induction speech, to present them for induction
Yeah,
in the Hall of Fame. When players who put their bodies on the line, being an NFL player is a brutal, forget how much money you make. It is a brutal sport. It tears your body up, right? Like
yeah,
you really have to feel like an owner
yeah,
knows you, cares about you, NFL teams are famous for discarding players at the first opportunity. And when player after player invites the owner of the team to come and present them, that tells you something about his personal relationship. One of his best known stories is that after when the Colts made the Super Bowl in 2000, after the 2006 season, he invited Edgerrin James, who is no longer a Colt, was playing for the Arizona Cardinals. He invited Edgerrin James to be on the sidelines during the game, and then he gave Edgerrin James a championship ring. I've never heard of a story like that. Yeah. But it was his recognition that, hey, you put your body into this, and you were our teammate, you were our guy, and we love you, and you were a part of this, even though you weren't still on the roster. That tells you something about the seriousness with which he took owning the team, caring for his employees. I've never heard anybody say a bad thing about meeting him, about an interaction with him. I think that says a lot, because when your father is the literal devil himself, according to your grandmother, and you live a life and people at the end say, hey, was an incredibly kind man, a present man, an eccentric man, for sure, but somebody who made the city in which he lived a better place. That's a pretty good that's a pretty good epitaph to have. So
yeah. And yeah, so let's end out this interview then, because I mean we could talk all day about the Colts, and we could definitely talk all day about Jim Irsay, just looking at his rock and roll collection.
Yes, it is amazing, by the way. That collection is astonishing. He would open it up for everyone in town to see, fill the Lucas Oil Stadium with it, open it up free to the public, and just remarkable historical documents, incredible guitars, the coolest guitars. Every cool song you've ever cared about or heard, he probably had the guitar it was written on and performed on. Incredible Beatles memorabilia, copies of the U.S. Constitution. I mean, it's just truly, truly remarkable and eclectic collection that he, didn't keep in a warehouse somewhere. He would trot it out and let the public see it free of charge. That was really special.
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose if he wasn't the owner of the Indianapolis Colts, he'd be your fun uncle who gave you your first mixtape and introduced you to your favorite band, and
sure.
the cool uncle who wore a leather jacket and smoked a cigarette. But no, I mean, so for, like I say, for an Indiana native then, and someone who's so connected to Indiana, Nate, the Irsay legacy, how has it changed from, like I say, from that very first day they rock up to an old elementary school to Lucas Oil, and now a very contending team and very great owners who have seen, is it just as simple as saying the Irsays seem to get better with every generation, and in 5 generation time, we're going to have the best owners ever?
I think that when any of us make an honest attempt to try to heal, to try to be healthy, we can move forward. And I think that that's his legacy. If the Irsay legacy in Baltimore is a stain, is lawsuits, is bitterness, the Irsay legacy in Indianapolis is one of joy, one of celebration, one of a city that's thriving, and that is entirely owed to Jim. And he has changed the narrative about his family, and his daughters are excellent people. His grandchildren are great people, and that's not an easy thing to do in one lifetime. That's a lot for any man. So I think everybody in Indianapolis, prays for him and hope, prays that he's resting in peace, because he deserves to do that.
And Nate, thank you so much for your time. And I think that's a beautiful place to end it. That for awesome. Jim Irsay, his legacy wasn't about winning or losing or money or fame or fortune. It was about healing and moving forward. And we look forward to more Irsays.
Absolutely.